All right, greetings everybody. It's Monday, June the 12th, the year 2017, and I want to do a book report on this book here written by J. Patrick Shannon. The title is The Montana Freemen, The Untold Story of Government Suppression and News Media Cover-Up. Okay, it's about 109, 110 pages, and it's very rare that you're going to get a book or any sort of information regarding the Montana Freemen that doesn't have the government spin. I'm also reading this one. I'm not done yet, so I'll do a book report on this one when I'm done. It's called One Freeman's War in the Second American Revolution by Mark Emery. But today I'm going to focus on this one right here. J. Patrick Shannon, the Montana Freeman. And he's got a website called ini-world-report.org. ini-world-report.org. But if you go look up any news reports on the Montana Freemen, you're going to see things like citizen militia, domestic terrorist, white supremacist, Christian patriots, all kinds of, sovereign citizens. And the Southern Poverty Law Center paints them as absolute criminals that, we should just bury under the prison, that they are some sort of horrific, hate group. And that's typically what you see on Wikipedia, or if you just type in Montana Freeman and some of these folks' names, you'll see all the write-ups and how skewed they are. But I think J. Patrick Shannon did a very good job at writing a book that was truthful and gave an accurate representation of what's really going on. I've never seen or heard any evidence whatsoever that these guys are white supremacists or domestic terrorists. They simply were standing up for their freedoms and their right to carry arms and to separate themselves from an oppressive, tyrannical government. If we move ourselves back in the 1990s to kind of put context on this, because there's a lot of parallels with the Montana Freemen and what's going on at the Bundy Ranch. Matter of fact, in this book, he lists all the freemen, and it must be, I hadn't counted them, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, probably 25 people that got put in prison. And one of them is Russell Dean Landers. I think he's the last remaining freeman alive. And just to let you guys know, I sent, when I was able to communicate with Russell, because they have banned me from ever speaking to Russell again. I pray that changes. I have written letters to the warden, and I've just spoke to somebody last night about communicating with a lawyer. And I don't like dealing with lawyers, but just seeing what can be done, if anything, to hold that warden accountable, because I believe what that warden did was illegal in banning me from communicating with Russell. But in any event, where was I going with that? The bottom line is that this book does give, I believe, a truthful representation, and it's very rare that you'll ever get a truthful representation. The Bundy correlation. So one of the things that started this off was there's a guy by the name of Leroy Schweitzer, and I want to read a little bit about him and how they tortured him in prison. But I think there was a guy whose farm got repossessed by the IRS, or it got taken over by the IRS. And so Leroy Schweitzer, I think his name was Randy Skirdall, and there was a collaboration between Schweitzer and Skirdall and maybe a few others to help save the farm from the government taking it over. It reminds me of the Bundys standing up for the Hammonds, right? But in any event, if we push ourselves back to 1990, the early 1990s, we had Lon Horiuchi, and in Texas, I remember they had Lon Horiuchi's face on a milk carton, and it said "Wanted, Dead or Alive." But Lon Horiuchi shot and killed Vicki Weaver in the head while she was holding her baby, her infant daughter. And so Lon Horiuchi, who was a sniper for the government, killed Vicki Weaver at Ruby Ridge. And the government also shot, I think it was 14-year-old Samuel Weaver in the back and killed him. So, they killed Randy Weaver's son, and they killed Randy Weaver's wife at Ruby Ridge in 1992, in August of 1992. And they tried to make him out to be a white supremacist, and they set him up by giving him a shotgun, or asking him to saw off a shotgun that was just a few inches short of being legal. In April 19th of 1993, we had Waco, and I don't need to go into all the details of that, but the government burned alive like 19 children, and just set them on fire and burned them up. And then you had these government agents like standing on top of their tanks, like posing for a picture over a dead trophy animal or something. And the government did a horrific thing at Ruby Ridge and also Waco, and they killed innocent people. And you know, there's all kinds of documentaries on both of those incidents. One of them is Waco, A New Revelation, and there's also another movie about Waco. Just look up the Waco Massacre documentary. If you move the clock forward a little bit, you've also got April the 19th on 1995, where there was an Oklahoma City bombing. And you can go look up a book called The Final Review, or The Final Report on the Oklahoma City bombing. There's also a documentary on that called A Noble Lie. And a lot of people believe that Timothy McVeigh was a patsy. Some people refer to Timothy McVeigh as the first warrior in the New American Revolution, but I believe he was probably a patsy. And then so you had 1992 was Ruby Ridge, 1993 was Waco, April the 19th, 1995 was the Oklahoma City bombing. On June the 14th of 1996, you had the Montana Freemen. And they brought in helicopters and FBI vehicles and hundreds of FBI marksmen and FBI agents. And that's where these Montana Freemen made their stand. And they were vilified in the media as being white supremacists, you know, Christian patriots, citizen militia, domestic terrorists, sovereign citizens. And the Southern Poverty Law Center painted them out as being, you know, just domestic terrorists. And, you know, of course, they believed the Bible, and so they made them out to be like anti-women, anti-everything, right? But they just wanted to stop the oppression of a tyrannical government. So this book, now getting onto this book, let me look and see how many pages it is. I did finish it. I read most everything except for the last few pages. It gets into some legal write-up. Russell Landers is prominently featured in this book. So I hope Russell Landers has a copy of this book. But you can get a copy of this book on Amazon, or you can go to that NEINI-World-Report, and you can buy it directly from J. Patrick Shannon's website. But a lot of Russell Landers' writings is in this book. On page 54, Leroy Michael Schweitzer appeared to be one of the very brilliant people from a legal perspective. He reminds me probably a lot of, who's the guy that helped Ken Hovind out legally? Brady Byram. You know, Brady Byram has that sort of mind where he has a very legal-oriented mind, and he knows the case law, and he studies Title 28, Section 22. So Leroy Michael Schweitzer reminds me a lot of Brady Byram. But Leroy Schweitzer's son and daughter went to visit him, and here's how they described what their dad told them. And keep in mind, Leroy Schweitzer died in prison. Never hurt anybody, never threatened anybody. But this is how, I think her name was Brandy Schweitzer, and she went and visited her dad with her fraternal twin. They were 21 years. They were 21 years when they They were 21 years old when they visited their dad, Leroy Schweitzer, in prison. And here's how they described what their dad told them. He described in detail how the federal marshals put shackles around his ankles and wrist so tightly that he bled. He said they strapped him in a chair and kicked him in the legs, hit him in the face, grabbed him by his hair, and yanked his head around, pushed in on his ears with their fingers until he almost passed out, and pressed the backs of his fingernails. They turned down the heat in his cell, took his blanket and his mattress, and left him in only his t-shirt and pants. That's how the daughter of Leroy Schweitzer, and I've heard Russell Landers talk about Leroy Schweitzer too. That's how the daughter explained how Leroy talked about his treatment in prison. We've also known that Russell has explained abuse in prison. Not only that, but the water is so horrific that it causes sores to break out on the body, and the sores do not heal. You say, well, what can we practically do with this information? The fact that we know they torture Christian patriots in prison. What can we practically do? Because we can't go save Russell by storming the prison with our 50 cal. I mean, that's not practical, right? But what we can do is we never go to prison. Don't let the evil bastards put you in a condition where they can treat you like they've treated Russell Landers or Leroy Michael Schweitzer. You need to make your mind up now, because these evil bastards, they are some evil, horrific reprobates from hell. And when they get you locked in that prison, there ain't no telling what they will do to you, right? We just read what they did to Leroy Schweitzer. Russell Landers has talked about some horrific things that go inside CMU prisons. These are innocent men that tried to stand up for liberty and freedom. So you need to make your mind up now. There's no point in going to prison and dying in prison after a whole bunch of torture and abuse, unless the Lord has given you specific directions. He's just appeared in front of you and said, Rudy, I need you to go to prison. If the Lord said to do that, well, it's like, okay, Lord, I'll do whatever you want me to do, Lord. Right? But the Lord hadn't given me those instructions. And if he has not given you those instructions, there ain't no reason to go to prison. You know, so what I learned when I studied Ruby Ridge and Waco and Oklahoma City and 9/11 and Montana Freemen is that I ain't never going to prison and letting these bastards take me to prison. Now, I haven't done anything. I got a very clean record my whole life, but that don't stop them from making stuff up. They'll make up anything they want to make up, right? But I'm just saying, don't ever let them take you to prison. Don't let the evil they are some evil, wicked bastards. All right, let me read you some other stuff that I wanted to read you in this book. So I read to you the torture of Leroy Schweitzer, but this is J. Patrick Shannon writing about, he writes about Dana, who is 46. She and her husband, Russell Landers, have been accused in Colorado of wittingly or unwittingly participating in another Federal Reserve fraud case unrelated to the Freemen situation. He goes on to talk about how Dana disappeared like 2.5 years ago. Russell don't know where she is. It doesn't surprise me that they don't want me to talk to Russell, because I believe Russell has some incredibly important information that if he was to share with the world, it would shock us. But so his wife Dana has disappeared about 2.5 years ago, and Russell, when I was talking to him, just outright told me that they murdered his son 5 years ago. They murdered Russell's son. He talks about how Dana was in leg shackles and handcuffs and for courtroom visits, and they treated her pretty bad. But then he goes on to write about Russell Landers, and I thought this was worth repeating. He says, Russell Landers was the most personable and easiest to know of all. He is 44 years old, sandy-haired, and clean-shaven, with a big howdy-doody smile. I was surprised, prejudging from the opinion of Senator Charles Dukes and the press reports. I was prepared to meet the bastard son of Charles Manson. Bullheaded and arrogant. Not so. Randy Parsons had promised him that I would treat him fairly and tell his story with accuracy. That was good enough for him, and he spoke freely with me for 20 minutes. He is gentle, warm, friendly on the surface, but robust and earnest in the defense of his rights. A man of steel and velvet, he would be my first choice as being one of the men to address the jury. So Patrick Shannon, who met Russell Landers, said he was prepared to meet the bastard son of Charles Manson based on what he read in the press. Met one of the most personable, enjoyable, likable guys that he'd ever met, right? And that goes along with my experience too. And I can see why they want to ban me from talking to Russell, because I believe Russell has some incredible information. There's a few other pages I want to read you guys before I shut this book report down. It said that when the Montana Freemen situation happened, the government was faced with 4 options, right? One option was to publicly acknowledge the limits of the United States and the state of Montana, as well as that they have been engaging in vastly unconstitutional activities since at least 1933. So one of the things the government could have done is just acknowledge that the Montana Freemen rightfully pointed out that the government had overstepped their boundaries and were engaging in activities that the Constitution did not allow. That was one of the options. The government could have done the right thing. The government could have come out, option number 2, to publicly state once and for all that the Constitution of the United States of America is null and void. That was option 2. So they could have admitted they were doing wrong, or they just could have said, well, the Constitution's null and void. We don't really pay attention to the Constitution anymore. The third option was to pull another Waco and just keep a lid on any kind of information that anyone was trying to get out, like this book. So they could have admitted they were doing wrong. They could have just said the Constitution's null and void. We're not paying attention to the Constitution anymore. Or they just could have killed everybody. They pretty much did kill everybody. They sentenced everybody to prison, death by prison. I think Russell is the only remaining person alive that was part of this group. The fourth option is to engage in a mass cover-up by capturing the Freemen, locking them up, drugging them, giving them a phony trial, and throwing away the key, and at the same time confiscate their documentation and books for trial, for burial. There's 2 things this book writes about that I thought was worth highlighting. The Montana Freemen captured a bunch of video, a lot more than we see on YouTube. And I think they made their case, right? They gave their reasons for doing what they were doing. They came out, and one of the guys gave it to the press because they wanted to release it to the press, but the FBI immediately confiscated the tape, and I don't think it's ever been seen since. So every time the Montana Freemen tried to get their story out and to describe in detail what their position was, the FBI confiscated the tape, and we've never seen it. So just keep that in mind. There was another incident where there was press on the grounds, and the Montana Freemen did not trust them, and they gave them 3 warnings over a long period of time and said, you need to get off our property. And the press didn't get off the property. This was like a couple of news reporters. So the Montana Freemen confiscated their stuff and told them and just forced them off the property. Well, that's absolutely within their rights to do that. But one of the government charges was they kidnapped some reporters. And we know what they did in the Bundy situation. They sent in this film crew that was actually FBI agents. And in actuality, they probably did the same thing to the Montana Freemen. These reporters were probably FBI agents. But they charged them with kidnapping and confiscating a film crew's equipment, and kicking them off the property after a certain amount of time. So the other thing that this book brings up is the idea that the Montana Freemen knew how bad the government was. Now you and I, if you're listening to me, the fact that you're even on my channel, you're probably already fully aware of how evil the government is. And so even when a regular cop pulls you over, when somebody shows up on your porch that tries to intimidate you, whether they're with the FBI, U.S. Marshals, Secret Service, local law enforcement that's posing as local law enforcement, you don't know if they are, you know that they're absolute children of the devil. I mean, I can't even talk bad enough about how bad they are. And you say, are you anti-law enforcement, Rudy? I'm anti-corruption in law enforcement, and a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch, and the whole bunch has been spoiled. I don't trust any sort of law enforcement whatsoever based on my experience, what I've read, and my life experience. Okay? So anyway, this book talks about how the Montana Freemen were holding their own. They were maintaining their stand. They were doing really good, right? And all of a sudden, they all just turned themselves in and like became submissive, and nobody knows why. It was even like a mystery to the Montana Freemen. Like, we don't even know why we turned ourselves in. Why did we do that? We were doing good on the ranch, and we had plenty of food and water, and we were willing to. There is this book talks about how they could have used those. You ever heard of Gwyn towers, where they send in electromagnet? There was reports that the government brought in this big microwave thing and was shooting these electromagnetic waves at their brain or something to make them go submissive, you know. And I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it lowers your ability to, you know, cognitively think about your situation so that you can make good decisions. I heard they use some of that in, like, you know, the Middle East at times. So it wouldn't surprise me if the government has some sort of weapon like that, you know. And didn't, like, the last Bundy guy, the guy who was on the phone, and I forget his name. Anyway, it was a younger guy, right? And he was, like, going to take a stand, and all of a sudden he like changes his mind all of a sudden, you know. So anyway, just be aware that the government has a lot of weapons, but we serve a mighty living God. We don't have to bow down and kiss the ring of tyranny. We do not have to submit to these evil bastards. You know, I will respect the laws of my land, and I will respect the legal law enforcement as long as they are acting constitutionally. But if I feel like they are targeting me unfairly, or I'm being, my life is being threatened, which they've killed Vicki Weaver, they killed Samuel Weaver. We know 9/11 was an inside job and that people within our own government killed thousands of people on 9/11. I believe Oklahoma City, that Timothy McVeigh was a patsy, and that I believe that the FBI and ATF agents that were in that building were told to leave the building long before it blew up. And so they knew something was going to happen, which means they were in on it. And so whether it was a situation that got out of control and they had wired the building with live explosives and somebody set it off and they didn't expect somebody to set it off, who knows? You know, just go read, just go watch Noble Lie. We did a film report on that, but there's a lot of flaky things going on with the Oklahoma City bombing. We know that they target anybody who stands up against government and says the truth. And so just be prepared. Always be prepared. Have your decision made up on what you're going to do if they ever try to target you and kill you, because you do have a right to defend yourself. And we know that they are murderers. They murdered Lavoy Finicum. They murdered him in outright blood, cold blood. They tried to murder Jeffrey Winehouse. They just shot him. And let me ask you this, for those of you who want to stand up for law enforcement, how can any law enforcement in Missouri not speak up their conscience after watching what happened to Jeffrey Winehouse? And you know that they know that Sergeant Henry Folsom attempted to murder Jeffrey Winehouse. Now, if you're a law enforcement official in Missouri and you know that that situation happened and you're not speaking up about it, you ever heard a few bad apples spoil the whole bunch? Well, you've just become complicit in your organization's criminal behavior of attempting to murder an innocent man, and you say that you're on the side of justice and truth and liberty? You got to be kidding me. They tried to murder Jeffrey Winehouse. We got law enforcement officials in Missouri that tried to cover it up. Not only tried to cover it up, but then they're going to put Jeffrey in prison for 30 years for being shot by the cops. His only crime is that he got shot by the cops. You know, he didn't try to shoot them. He didn't pull out his gun. Anybody with any common sense knows that he did not do that. And it's proven via a reflection of an image in the paint of his vehicle. And it's also just common sense. You know, you wouldn't... We know what Jeffrey's mindset was. He was exposing corruption. He was trying to expose evildoers in government. And for that, they tried to kill him. And, you know, that's probably what they'll try to do to all of us who take a stand at some point in time. But so what? Anyway, I'd highly recommend this book. I think if you're interested in history, you know, there's the phrase, if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. And so this helps us learn from history. We need to study what went on with the Montana Freemen, what went on in Oklahoma City, what went on in Ruby Ridge, and what went on in Waco. What's going on right now with the Bundys, and what's going on right now with Jeffrey Winehouse, Schuyler Barbeau, Schaeffer Cox. And if I get a little passionate or angry at times, it's because there are people's lives that are being destroyed by corruption in our law enforcement, corruption in our judiciary system, and nobody seems to want to do anything about it. But we ain't going to shut up. We ain't going to be quiet about it. So anyway, remember that jury nullification is the last line of peaceful defense between a tyrannical government and the defendant. You can learn about jury nullification at fija.org, F-I-J-A.org. Thank you for your time.